The number one problem that most personal brands have when it comes to monetizing their audience, and the reason why some people will get millions of views and not make any significant amount of money, is because they have shitty DM setters, which is a result of a shitty DM setter management system. So today I'm gonna go break down the DM setter management system that we use to build over a dozen 500K all the way up to $1 million a month DM setting teams, making DM setters some of the most valuable people in a sales organization. Now, the reason I knew I had to make a video on this because last month we had two clients. They both were in the exact same niche. They had more or less the exact same offer at a very similar price point. And they both had, give or take, 3,000 plus inbound leads. Here's where it gets crazy. Client number one had 3,000 leads, of which she booked like 120 or 130 calls, and off of she collected $111,000. Client number two, on the flip side, he still got the same 3,000 leads. He booked 250 plus calls, and out of those, he collected $315,000 in sales. The difference was, it wasn't that the setters were any better. You know, the difference of it wasn't anything with the leads. They were more or less the same leads. The whole difference came is how those individual setter teams were managed, and as a result, how those DM setters were acting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that to break down the 5 key management principles we have with DM setters. Now, first things first, and this is probably the most important one, is actually setting key KPIs. Now, when people look at KPIs, they always just look at, you need to book this many calls. That is, in my eyes, completely wrong. When it comes to tracking DM setters and evaluating DM setters based on KPIs, there's a few metrics that we look at. So first things first is tracking how many inbound leads you're getting. Now, what I classify as an inbound lead is someone who either responds to a comment CTA and they comment a specific keyword, or they send you a direct sort of keyword to kind of learn from you. That's what to me is an inbound lead. So I want to track how many of those are we getting, which is kind of like how many at-bats does your setter team have as a whole. The second thing I then want to track is how many of those were labeled as DQ. Now, very importantly, to kind of classify what a disqualified lead is someone who simply leads with a message of like, hey, I'm broke as shit, you know, less than 500 credit score, or they just simply arm from the target audience, which means they're based in like a non-buyer demographic country. So that's what the second thing I want to track. Number three, I want to obviously track how many calls we book, but that's more of a metric for the key one, which is what's the new leads to book call ratio. So quickly determining new lead to book call ratio, simply put, is essentially how many calls are you booking for every 10 or 100 leads. So in ideal scenario, for every 100 leads inbound that you're getting, you're booking anywhere between 10 to 15 calls. But if your setter team's booking 3%, 2%, there's a significant issue, because for me, we call this personal brand math. There's two components. If 1 in 10 conversations turns into a booked call and your sales team is capable to close $1,000 for every call that's being booked, meaning if you have a $10,000 program, for every 10 calls that are being booked, you collect $10,000. We are now aware that for every 100 leads, we're collecting $10,000, which means we're roughly going to go and collect $100 for every single lead that we're getting, which is honestly a pretty good metric. And that then allows us to sort of on the front end play the math of, hey, how much money do we spend to acquire a lead? And then if we understand that we acquire a lead for $8 and $10 and we make $100 per lead, it means we're getting a solid 10x. So that allows us to play a little bit of math when it comes then to spending money on DM ads, shout outs, collabs, or any other form of follower and lead acquisition. So those are sort of the metrics that I look for. And I don't like to look at anything else other than calls booked, number of inbound leads, new lead to book call ratio, DQ, because if one of their core metrics, let's say new lead to book call ratio, are significantly down, the only justifiable excuse is that there's a significant increase in DQ leads. But again, you gotta have a very good definition of what a disqualified lead actually is, otherwise setters will abuse it. And then last but not least, I like to look at speed to lead. A bit of a harder metric to track, but you can do that within ManyChat. And that honestly is just a great metric to cross-check setters. So for example, if I understand that, oh, we're not booking enough, and they're like, oh, the leads are not very responsive, but they have like a 20-minute like speed to lead, very clear and obvious reason. Whereas if leads are non-responsive and like you have a bunch of people that are being responded to in a minute, but they don't actually respond, then maybe the message is wrong or there's other things we can tweak. And so first things first, most organizations, they don't even have any of those metrics. They just look at those and they're like, you know, we just look at how many calls we book and then they sack it. With those two clients that I've mentioned at the very beginning, the premise that client number one, who made significantly less money, had was the following. Well, we're not booking a lot of calls, we need more leads. Because he was just like, more leads equals more calls. Great success. What he didn't understand is that with his organization, the setters were booking at like a 3.5% rate. Their speed to lead was shit. They had low DQ rates and low booking rates. And so as a result, even if we tripled the lead volume, it wouldn't have fixed the problem, because the sales reps or the closers or setters in that case, they would have just absolutely shot the bed on more leads, which means you just have a higher burn rate when it comes to your lead volume, which makes it very marketing dependent and is incredibly difficult. Whereas client number two, what he did is, because he had clear-cut KPIs and a setter manager that was interested in those KPIs, he was able to make pivots right off the riff and go, oh, well, let me actually go and make these changes. Let me tweak some messages. And as a result of that, was able to get to a near 10% booking ratio, which is why they booked 250 calls and collected double amount of the money. Now, KPIs alone are a great start, but they're useless unless unless you have multiple ways to kind of enforce them. So to me, the KPIs and kind of setting that benchmark with your setter team and getting them to agree to certain KPIs is the first step. But then the next 4 principles is really how you enforce them. The core of that is a daily audit. Now, I want to preface this by saying that setters are kind of like toddlers. They are setters because something in their life went terribly wrong. That's not to speak poorly of setters, but the point is that if you could choose a career, nobody looks around and is like, I want to be a DM setter and sit on another man's phone and send messages to strangers, trying to convince them to book a call with my sales team. Nobody wants to do that. People become setters or closers because something in their lives went wrong and they need a way to make some more money. It just kind of tells me that they, from a mindset, from an approach, from a work ethic perspective, are not quite at the level that you would want any individual in the organization to be. What I like to do on setter teams is to have a daily audit. It's 15 minutes, and all you do is the following. Before the meeting, let's say it's at 9 o'clock, so 8:45, you sit your ass down, you log into ManyChat, and you just randomly pick 20 open conversations inside of ManyChat. And all that is you're going to do, you're simply going to go look through this. Like, number 1, is the speech to lead on 10 to 15 conversations pretty good? Number 2, are there any conversations where they're making clear-cut mistakes? They're butchering like tactical stuff. They're not giving accurate feedback, saying wrong things. Are they clear-cut mistakes? Or are they simply not sounding like a robot? And then based on that, you kind of provide feedback. And then last but not least, you want to check, is the flow that they're having pretty congruent? Are they referencing like a lead's name? Are they actually capable of giving emotional sounding responses? Do they ego check people when they're giving stupid or short responses? And when you understand what they're doing well or not, you can actually kind of prep some feedback. When you actually jump onto the meeting, the one thing that you want to do, which is super simple, is you just want to go through, hey, what was yesterday's data? Okay, cool. You had this many leads, this much. What was the reason? And you want it to almost be like a boardroom where they come to you at 9 o'clock and they report to you. This is what happened. This what went well. This what went bad. Here's what I'm going to do to replace the bad if need be. So if you're underperforming, what are you going to do to fix performance? And then what you do is, once they've reported, is you challenge them on stuff that you think is wrong. So within like 15 to 20 minutes, you'll be able to provide them with feedback. And then what do you do at the end of each meeting? You go, hey, let's fucking get after it. Because the one thing that I believe is the most valuable thing to have with a DM setter is for you as a high-level rich person or high-level performance individual to give them faith that they can do it and give them words of information. The biggest reason why most setter teams are so underperforming and threatened to get replaced by AI, which I personally don't think is going to happen anytime soon, is simple. Most managers treat setters like they're bottom of the earth scum. They treat them like they don't matter in an organization, when in reality, a good setter is more valuable to any info product or coaching high-ticket organization than a good closer. Yeah, I said that. Because you can put a really good setter into the DMs and they'll either close deals through the DMs or absolutely get people to the place where they're walk down leads and all your closers have to do is show up and not be stupid. The reason I say that these daily cadences are important is because knowing that they haven't achieved certain things in life that they might want to, or they struggle to do basic things, the number one rule that you got to follow is you got to give these people consistency and predictability, where they know if they have a bad day, they have to explain themselves the next day. It's as simple as that. Once you kind of have the KPIs and you kind of have a bit of a daily flow where data is reported not based on their estimates, based on absolutes. So from ManyChat, from your call booking software, like you actually have numbers and you have a cadence of giving them feedback. You have a solid foundation, but that's really only where the nitty-gritty actually starts. So principle number 3 that we kind of look for with good setter managers is just people management. I've alluded this previously, where setters are kind of like toddlers. And so the easiest lever that you can pull with people is you can manage them as individuals. Because once again, setting does not require incredible skills. It's not one of those things where you're like, wow, this is highly complex, highly technical. Setting is simply about pattern recognition, having some form of emotional intelligence, and being able to categorize where people are, where they're trying to go, and how you can take your product or service as the bridge between those two states. The skills, the setting, the script is not the most difficult thing. It's the adherence and sort of the self-recognition of what's needed to push more people who are here all the way on the path where they want to actually achieve the result or believe that your vehicle could be the solution. So how do you manage these people? It's a good question. I'm gonna break it down for you super simple. When it comes down to managing DM setters, there's a few principles that I like to use, which is the bar raiser method, which is super simple. Most individuals, they're used to operating at a certain frequency. People understand that if shit hits the fan, they're like, oh, I am actually like at the bottom of everything. They really jump things up. And then once things are going well, they hit their upper ceiling, right? They're like, I can relax now. The realistic thing is they're operating within this sort of range where they're thinking that's what their performance is possible. But that's where you have to kind of shatter their beliefs and force them to raise their bar. We get an example of that. We had a setter team about a year ago, more or less, and these particular setters were fucking up a bunch of leads. They were some of the worst performing setters, but when you speak to them, they'd be very convinced in their own abilities, and they're like, well, we were on this previous offer and we were the best performers. I was the manager on there. It was amazing. And they were very convinced in their abilities because in their mind, they were like, here are my abilities and I'm performing consistently in this bracket. Therefore, I'm maxing maxing out my capabilities? Well, it wasn't until I had a very blunt conversation I made one thing clear. Here's my standard and here's the minimum acceptable standard. Your maximum is right here. So either you raise it up or I'm gonna find someone that's happy to jump on here or raise the bar all the way up. And kudos to them, they decided and realized then that, oh, we've been operating good, but our standard of good was actually just really shit. So I need to step up. Fast forward today, almost a year later, they're one of the best performing setter teams. So really much kudos to them, right? Because they've done the work. But it just kind of tracks back to understanding that for you as a people manager, you gotta go and just raise their bar. You gotta understand them to expand their horizon, think bigger, and understand what is truly possible. If their definition of good is to set 100K in a single month, you're gonna raise that bar to 300K and force them to understand, like, look, you can do this. It has been done before. And if you do that, here's how your life adjusts. Which brings me to principle number 2. Within people management, I like to understand their personal motives, because I have this principle called congruency principle, where I want people to understand that their actions and their goals need to be in alignment for them to be able to achieve any form of success. Which means if you're a DM setter and you're trying to get to 300K per month set because you want to make 10, 15K per month, well, if you have that goal, the daily actions and the approach that you bring to work is not congruent with your goal. The only person you can blame is yourself, or you can be a victim and kind of change the goalpost. And so the one thing that I do with every single setter that I manage is I have a conversation of where they are right now, where they want to go. And I ask them a very important question. What is the version of you who's capable of achieving all of the goals is doing right now that the current version of you is not doing? So that way they draw out the discrepancy between who they are and who they need to become, which once they do that exercise, I can then literally go and say, hey, are you congruent with the actions that you said you would take? Because again, with data, with daily inputs, I can track that now. And so essentially what happens at the end is they can actually agree whether or not they're not doing it. And if they're not congruent, which is going to happen a lot of times, it allows you as the manager, as the leader, to check up with them. When people understand that you give a fuck about them achieving their personal goals, they'll magically start to give a lot more fucks about helping you achieve your goals. And so that's where is the principle of sort of like the bar raiser and personal development route that I found extremely beneficial when it comes down to people management. Now, at this point, if you have the KPIs, you do daily audits and you manage them, the last thing, in my eyes at least, from an emotional sort of mental perspective, is narrative control. There's always going to be ebbs and flows when it comes down to leads that you get from content, DM ads, whatever. One month it's much better, one month it's much worse. The one thing that will happen with DM setters, because they are toddlers and they are inconsistent, is they're going to start having narrative shifts. For example, they might chat to a few friends, they're like, oh, lead quality is like shit. You know, they're like, oh yeah, me too, but like that's seasonal. Like right now in summer, the lead quality is shit and like people just don't respond. What's going to happen the moment they start hearing that, if your setters aren't very seasoned, is what's going to happen is they're going to start telling you these exact things, because again, they've been told that this is normal. So what they're now perceiving as normal, they're going to experience. And so as a result, they're all of a sudden going to come to be like, oh my God, response is pretty no, it's just because of the summer, or they just start booking less because they fall for this almost like placebo that's been placed into their brain. Or they'll come and be like, hey, for a few days, I had a lot of bad leads and now all they can see is bad leads. And so the one thing that you need to have, which is principle number 4 that I think is super crucial, is narrative control. Whenever setters come to me and they try to convince me of their view or that something is wrong, I need to be extremely quick and extremely determined in shifting their narrative. Because at the end of the day, it's to sell or be sold, which means they try to sell you that their worldview is correct, whereas I'm trying to sell them that they're wrong. Let me give you a very good example. One of my setter managers, best setter I've ever worked with, came to me the other day and was like, oh my God, dude, we're sitting way below a 10% booking rate. Tell me why. And he goes, well, you know, right now, 60% of the leads, they have a credit score of less than 600, so we can't really book them, and then they're not really responsive. I went, okay, cool. Again, in my head, I was like, that's okay, but what you're articulating to me is that we have 700 leads, and then off of those, you can't book 70 calls, right? As a matter of fact, you're sitting at like 20 calls or something like that. So that is not really true. My shift to him was, look, I understand what you're articulating to me, but the truth of the matter is that if you give a closer leads and you expect them to close at 10%, if you just give them qualified and financially capable leads who show up to the call, you'd expect him to book at double the rate. Is that fair to assume? And he was, yeah, of course. You have half of the leads are disqualified. Cool. So you have 350 leads. So you can book 20% of those. That's a fair assumption to make, which puts you back at 70 calls, which is a 10% ratio. So at the end of the day, the leads aren't the problem. It's the fact that the setters just focus on the leads who are disqualified versus reshifting their minds, being like, okay, cool, these leads are not good, but I still have 350 leads that are qualified. So I just got to focus on booking a higher percentage of those. Now, guess what happened? Long and behold, after I got through to the setter manager and he actually went back and implemented it with the team. If you guessed that the booking rates went drastically up and we went back to booking at 10% overall, you are goddamn right. But this is a great example of how you as the leader, you as sort of the person in your business who is the money, you got to go and hold an extreme high standard and narrative for your people. You can't be the type where your closers start bitching about lead quality. We're like, oh yeah, we need to change marketing. Or when your sellers can't book you, like, oh yeah, like I guess we just need more leads. You could have an extreme high standard and be extremely rigid with KPIs, with your routines, where you don't allow them to fall below the standards that you set. Within my business, when we talk to clients, to setters, to setter managers, to sales managers, I have very clear metrics that are based on 3 or 5 years of data that I refuse to disallow. If somebody's telling me, yeah, it's just not possible to get to $1,000 per booked call because of X, Y, and Z reason, I can tell you guaranteed it is not because of whatever reason they're articulating. It's because the sales team or the setter team is shitting the bed. It's as simple as that. And so for you as a leader, you gotta have this narrative control where you need to always be able to revert it back unless there's like very mitigating circumstances, which that's 1 in 100. Unless those mitigating circumstances happen, you gotta go and really force them to actually go and adhere to what it is you're saying. Once you have the narrative control, you have the KPIs, you audit them daily, and you evaluate them as people, you are 95 of the way there to being a top tier manager and your setter output massively jumping out. The last thing, which is now how you get people to go from okay or bad setters to great and awesome setters to awesome setters that stay there forever, is to build the culture. I've alluded to this earlier, but the one thing that I do with my setters is I give them power, which means if I hear from setters that, hey, closers are no-showing leads or canceling calls or doing stuff that prevents them to earn money, I take that significantly more serious than if closers come to me and cry about a lead being financially disqualified. I personally like to give the setter some form of status quo and status delta when they actually perform, because they're some of the most important people in my company, because they see what questions people are asking. They see what happens on calls because they need to follow up with people. They directly can swift a no-show into a rebooking, or they can shift a no/deal loss/follow-up into a deal won. And so by giving them a bit of status quo, the power to see certain stuff and treating them with some form of respect, I want to go and ingrain a certain culture within them. Because if you can install the savage, thinking bigger, and actually taking control of your leads, your accountability, if you can ingrain that within them, you can eventually promote a setter into a setter manager or a setter into a closer, which now means your entire sales organization has significantly higher standards because they came from the ground up and they gradually ingrain what it is you're doing in your life. Last but not least, the one thing that I have found is that because setters are starting more or less from rock bottom and usually they're not in the best situations, they're very receptive to feedback, which means if you build them as people, they will always associate you with how they changed their lives. They're even more open to coaching, they're more open to expanding their roles within your organization, and they're extremely fucking loyal. To me, that is the biggest thing within the culture. There's certain setters of me that have gotten poached by competitors or by competing offers and we're told, hey, we'll pay you double the commission for the first 3 months. And they gladly refuse because they're like, no, you actually brought me up. You actually helped me become the person that I am today. Not only from a work environment, but from a personal point in terms of being a better person, eating healthier, being better in all realms of life so that they can do their job better. That they actually want to be with you because they see the benefit aside from just the money. If you can create that kind of culture, it makes your job easier because they will self-pace for their KPIs and self-regulate if they're not hitting them. They will show up super prepared. It's like a little mini board meeting where you just be given an update and you just challenge them eventually. You don't really have to do much narrative control. And if it is, it's actually at a much higher level, which means we're now going from level 8 to level 10 versus from level 1 to level 2. And last but not least, the people management becomes significantly easier because you just need to introduce them to new and higher level concepts. It's fun in the first place. And so kind of rounding this whole out, the reason this is also important is because there's serious revenue attached to it. Again, I broke this down to you with 2 clients, 3,000 leads each. Client number 1 didn't take the setter management extremely serious. He thought it was a bit of a joke and he just thought marketing just needs to do better. He ended up only booking 100+ calls and collected less than $1,000 per call. Whereas client number 2 also had 3,000 leads, probably a bit less to be honest, booked 250 calls, right, which is almost 10%. And off of that created $315,000 in sales. Same offer, same industry, same lead flow, completely different reality. The only difference here was client number 1 thought it was, oh, we just need more leads. And he actually didn't take the management side serious. Whereas client number 2 took it extremely serious and made it a point to absolutely excel within that field. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this video is that if you don't have a dialed-in setter management system, you got to set that up today. Tracking, meeting structure, follow-up structure, people management. The key components that you need to actually turn a setter from a donkey into a freaking stallion that builds your organization for you. Now, before I leave you with this, setters in my organization are the best and fastest indicator on what's wrong with an offer, what's wrong with the marketing, and what closers might be struggling and not doing their job. It makes my life so much easier because I spent the time on building up these DM setters. I really hope this video was of some form of value to you. Now, with that said, if you're an info coaching business owner and you actually struggle to recruit, train, upgrade, all the way up to manage your DM setter as a team, or you just struggle to create content that's actually driving high intent leads, grows your audience and does the things that you need to grow your company, feel free to click the link below. We do have systems that we install all for info coaching business owners, helping them scale up as we've done for dozens of our done for you and consulting clients. And outside of that, please feel free to subscribe to the channel as well. You're always much reported and appreciated here. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next one.